Ruby Estelle Dorman was born July 7, 1924. In 2003, Ruby was 78 years old and worked as a buffet hostess at the Flamingo Laughlin in Laughlin, Nevada. On April 20, 2003, she clocked out at 2:26 p.m. and changed out of her uniform and into a black sweater, slacks, and shoes and headed home in her white Honda Accord. Ruby's daughter, 46-year-old Julianne White, whose birth name was Juanita White, called her mother's roommate, Jane Ruge, that morning and asked for directions to their mobile home. Jane said that Ruby had already left for work when her daughter arrived, and then Jane fell asleep. It is believed that Ruby arrived home and left with her daughter in her Honda, but her roommate was asleep at the time and was unsure of this. At 4:50 p.m. that day, her daughter Julianne returned to Ruby's house alone, driving her mom's car. She dropped it off and drove away in her own Jeep Cherokee and did not come inside to speak to Jane, who had just awakened from her nap to see her pulling into the driveway in Ruby's car. The car contained Ruby's purse and keys, but no other evidence leading to a crime or her whereabouts, and she has never been seen again. Julianne has a history of mental illness and long-standing animosity towards her mother and had threatened her in the past. Among other things, she believed that her mother ordered Charles Manson and his followers to murder Rosemary LaBianca, Julianne's aunt on her father's side, in 1969. Rosemary and her husband Leno were stabbed to death in August 1969 in their Los Angeles home, and followers of Charles Manson were convicted of the murders. However, there is no evidence that Manson or any of his followers had any connection to Ruby. In a letter to a Los Angeles investigator, Julianne wrote that her mother had sent her away to camp that summer so she could plot the LaBianca's murders. Julianne also wrote a letter reading, "Rosemary LaBianca, let it be known that she wanted to adopt me so as to save me." Ruby Dorman made the decision to get even with Rosemary LaBianca and sent her address to the Manson family. She then wrote that when her mother read about the murders the next day, she let out a phony scream. "I knew that by tolerating her evil presence, I would eventually get each and every detail about the day my aunt was slain." Julianne was interviewed twice by authorities after her mother's disappearance and reportedly gave inconsistent statements. She denied driving Ruby's car or seeing her at all the day she vanished, although Ruby's roommate witnessed her doing both. Julianne moved away a short time after her mother disappeared, and investigators have not been able to locate her for a third interview, and there is insufficient evidence to charge her in her mother's case. Police believe she could provide more information if they could only find her. However, due to a lack of evidence, they have been unable to acquire an arrest warrant. Based upon interviews with people who knew the family, and based upon Julianne's statements and writings, she apparently held her mother accountable for everything that went wrong in her life. An 80-year-old Las Vegas woman who asked that her name not be used during an interview in the early 2000s said Julianne was staying with her during the time that Ruby went missing. The woman was like a second mother to Julianne, who lived with the woman part-time when she was between the ages of 18 months and 6 years old. She said she remembers Julianne rambling about the connection to the Manson family during her most recent stay with her, but she tried not to pay attention. Recalling April 20th, 2003, the woman said that she didn't notice Julianne behaving any differently. She stated that Julianne stayed in her bedroom so much that she finally told her she should get herself a job. Before long, she packed her bags and moved out. She later visited the woman to see if she had any mail and said she had gotten a job at a pickle factory. In 2002, Julianne wrote a book on Jimmy Page of the band Led Zeppelin. Investigators stated that she is divorced and is believed to be moving around the country, living off the profit of the sale of her home. Ruby was described as a very reliable person who had not missed a single day of work in 20 years prior to her disappearance in April 2003. Her credit cards have never been used since she went missing. No one has been charged in connection with her case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Amanda Lee Fravel, nicknamed Mandy, was born May 9, 1966 in California and apparently grew up in an unstable home with her siblings. While her father was in rehab, her stepmother kicked her out of the home, forcing her to stay with different friends and then with her mom in Santa Rosa. After some time, she was again kicked out, but this time it was by her stepfather. In 1985, after graduating high school, she moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. She stayed with a friend and her friend's husband at first, then moved into a place of her own, but found that it was too expensive and moved in with a roommate and worked at Taco Bell. In June 1986, her mother sent her a plane ticket so she could come home to California to visit. However, she never arrived. Her roommate said he last saw her on June 13, 1986, leaving their apartment on 3rd Street to go pick up her paycheck at Taco Bell and visit her boyfriend Xavier. Mandy did not have a vehicle, and it's unclear what her means of transportation was that day. There are reports that she was a frequent hitchhiker, but a friend said she had stopped hitchhiking entirely by the time she disappeared after she had a bad experience. She never arrived at either of her destinations and has never been heard from again. A few weeks after Mandy's disappearance, her mother and stepfather came to Las Vegas to investigate her case. They met with her boyfriend and with her roommate. All of Mandy's things in the apartment were packed up, and her 2 kittens had reportedly not been fed or cared for since she went missing. Mandy is described as a caring pet owner who would not have willingly left her kittens without food. Mandy's mother and stepfather and her friend were all suspicious of her roommate Lou Frank. He appeared to be in his late 40s in 1986, and many of the visitors to the apartment were much younger people. He stated he was from Georgia, although he spoke without any discernible accent, and said he had come to Nevada to open up a brothel. There is no record of Lou in Nevada state records, and investigators believe that the name Lou Frank was an alias. His current whereabouts are unknown, and he has never been named as a suspect in Mandy's disappearance. Foul play is suspected in Mandy's case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Maureen Erin Fields was born November 6, 1964. She would graduate from North Arlington High School in New Jersey in 1983. Her loved one stated she was very particular about her appearance and had cosmetic nose surgery and liposuction. She also never wore jeans or t-shirts in public, and she never left the house without makeup on. In 2006, 41-year-old Maureen lived with her husband of 15 years, Paul Fields, in Pahrump, Nevada. She had been employed as a bank teller at the Pahrump Valley branch of the Wells Fargo Bank for 3 months. On Valentine's Day, 2006, she was very tearful at work but did not go into any details about what was wrong. She did, however, tell her coworkers that something's going to happen. When asked if she was going to have a good Valentine's, she replied no. The next morning, when she didn't show up for work, her coworkers called her husband Paul. He said they had an argument and then he thought she left for work around 8 a.m. After getting off the phone with her coworkers, he went directly to the police station. Paul later claimed that he attempted to report Maureen as a missing person when he first went to the police station, but the police wouldn't accept a report because she hadn't been missing for 24 hours. However, the police said that when Paul came to the station, he said nothing about a missing person and only asked if there had been any accidents involving a green Hyundai. On February 16th, Maureen's green 2004 Hyundai was found deserted in the Mojave Desert in California, about 20 miles from Maureen's home. It had been stuck in the sand about 125 feet off the road. Her keys were in the ignition, the driver's seat was fully reclined, and her slippers and eyeglasses were under the gas pedal. Some religious pamphlets were fanned out next to her purse, which contained her credit cards and wallet. A knotted pair of pantyhose was also there, as were bottles of prescription painkillers and an empty bottle of Xanax. Strangely, the bottle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. There was also a .22 caliber rifle in the back seat that the couple owned. On the ground nearby was a blanket stained with a small amount of blood and vomit. However, there was no signs of Maureen. Authorities initially believed Maureen wandered off into the desert and committed suicide. An extensive search of the area turned up no signs of her, and no suicide note was recovered. DNA from an unidentified male was subsequently discovered on items at the site of the abandoned car. Investigators stated they believed the scene had been staged by whoever was responsible for Maureen's disappearance. Authorities believe foul play was involved in Maureen's case, and for years they focused on Paul as their prime and only suspect. Maureen's family claims the marriage was very troubled and she wanted a divorce. One of Maureen's friends described Paul as a jealous, domineering husband and stated Maureen was afraid he would kill her. She told many people she was afraid of Paul, but she denied any physical abuse. Paul's alibi was that he spent the evening of the 14th at home with Maureen, but his cell phone records from that night showed him making a call to an acquaintance which pinged off a cell tower. The location of this tower seemed to place Paul on the other side of town when the call was placed. He also claimed Maureen had been draining thousands of dollars from their joint accounts prior to her disappearance, and he believed she had a gambling problem as well as a problem with prescription drugs. She normally handled the couple's finances, but after Paul found out about the missing money, he told her he was going to start checking their bank and credit card statements from now on. Paul said Maureen took two $7,000 cash advances off their credit cards prior to her disappearance and withdrew $2,000 from their joint bank account. He theorized she staged a suicide and ran away rather than face up to what she had done. He also said he had evidence that Maureen had asked a third party to kill him prior to her disappearance, but police do not believe these allegations. Police checked into the couple's finances after Maureen disappeared and said Paul's statements were inaccurate and his wife only took one $4,000 cash advance from a credit card. They were able to track down this money and could show she used the funds to pay off another credit card. Paul allowed the police to search his house and property several times. He initially consented to a polygraph, but changed his mind later on the advice of his attorney. He has since stopped cooperating with police in Maureen's disappearance. After waiting the required 90-day period following Maureen's disappearance, he went to court to get her name taken off their jointly owned land, claiming abandonment. In an effort to keep Paul from getting her assets, Maureen's father attempted to become her legal guardian. In response, Paul dropped his claims that Maureen abandoned her property and changed her status to a missing person. While she was legally missing, he could not divorce her. He had her declared legally dead in 2009 and was named executor of her estate. Her family reported that she had once said that if she ever disappears, that Paul did it. Paul's ex-wife and mother of his two daughters claimed that he once slashed her tires and smashed her car window. Police considered Paul to be the prime suspect, but in 2012, the DNA from the knotted pantyhose was matched to an 81-year-old registered sex offender named Keith Wayne Holmes, who was incarcerated after attempting to lure a 12-year-old girl into his car in Pear Blossom, California. When Holmes was arrested, a newspaper clipping of an anniversary article about Maureen's disappearance was found under a mattress in his 1965 camper. Witnesses placed Holmes in the Pahrump area in 2006 as they remembered him frequenting local campgrounds during that time. When Holmes was questioned by police, he explained the DNA evidence by claiming he and Maureen had consensual sex together before he left her alive in Death Valley and they went their separate ways. Holmes died in a prison hospice in April 2014. He also stated he knew Paul, but he didn't provide any further information about Maureen's disappearance. He was questioned repeatedly by the police in his final days, but he had dementia and was often not lucid. Authorities stated finding Holmes' DNA didn't mean that Paul was ruled out as a suspect. In spite of the DNA match, police have not eliminated Paul as a suspect and believe the two men were both involved in Maureen's disappearance. As of today, Maureen has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Anthony Bernard Franko was born August 15, 1972, and nicknamed Tony. When he was 10 years old, he was a 5th grader at Lemon Valley Elementary School and was in the 4-H club. He lived with his mother and stepfather just half a mile from his school in a small suburb north of Reno, Nevada. One day, his mother, Liza, had punished him for having poor grades, and he had decided to run away to the mountains. He had taken some food and plates with him and even left a goodbye note for her. He came back home within a few hours, crying and promising to never run away again. About a month later, on May 8, 1983, Tony would go missing. He He was last seen that morning walking to school. Although his normal route to school was to walk north of Fremont Street, he apparently went in the opposite direction the morning he disappeared. A witness saw him in a cul-de-sac on the south end of Fremont Street, talking to an unknown individual driving a rusted vehicle, possibly a Ford Pinto or a Camaro. There was a 7-Eleven store just a short distance away from the cul-de-sac that Tony was spotted at. It wasn't uncommon for children, including Tony, to stop at the 7-Eleven store before going to school. However, he never arrived at school and has never been heard from again. The school didn't notify his family that he didn't show up for class. As a result, they didn't realize he was missing until later that day when he didn't call his mother, as he usually did when he arrived home from school. After coming home from work and realizing he wasn't there, she notified police. The day before his disappearance, he won a blue ribbon for showing his pet pony and 2 rabbits at a 4-H show. He took his ribbon with him when he left for school the next day, planning to show it to classmates. The police initially assumed he had run away a second time and didn't start to investigate other theories until several days had passed. His mother never believed he had run away because he was very happy on the day of his disappearance due to his 4-H ribbon. Both his mother and stepfather took polygraph tests and were ruled out as suspects. His mother stated that Tony was somewhat naive for his age and would have most likely talked to a stranger. 4 years after his disappearance, Jennifer Martin would go missing from the same area on June 28, 1987. She had been to the same 7-Eleven store on Lemon Valley Drive and bought candy and a soda and was never seen again. In 2002, Stephen Keesley, a defrocked priest, was arrested and charged with 13 counts of child molestation during the time he worked at Santa Paula Catholic Church in Fremont, Nevada from 1968 until 1971. He immediately became a person of interest in both the cases of Jennifer Martin and Tony Franko, and police, using cadaver dogs, a radar, and a backhoe, searched Keesley's yard for evidence of the 2 Lemon Valley children, as well as Amber Swartz Garcia, a 7-year-old who disappeared in 1980 from her home in Pinole, California. However, the only item recovered was a bag filled with dirt and decomposed clothing. In 2004, Keesley pled no contest to a felony charge of molesting a young girl in 1995 at his Truckee, Nevada vacation home and would serve 6 years in prison for the crime. While he may be a potential suspect, there has been no evidence linking him to either Jennifer or Tony's disappearance. It's been around 40 years since he disappeared, and his mother has never given up hope and still posts pictures of him online on his birthday and during holidays. As of today, he has never been found, and this case remains unsolved. Randi Layton Evers was born December 3, 1988. On February 16, 1992, when he was 3 years old, his father, Mike Evers, and stepmother, Tina Evers, had a party to celebrate his father's birthday. There was a lot of drinking going on at the party, and many people were coming and going throughout the night. One report states that around midnight, his father, stepmother, and other friends left to go to Gold Coast Casino, leaving Randi in the care of a man that was passed out on the couch while Randi slept on the floor. Another report states that Tina went with friends while Mike went to bed with his 1-year-old daughter. Either way, Randi was last seen between 11:30 p.m. on February 15th and 12:30 a.m. on February 16th, 1992. He was last seen wrapped in a blanket and asleep on the living room floor at 313 East Rochelle Avenue in Las Vegas, Nevada. At some point, it was discovered that he was missing. Strangely, Randi's father and his stepmother Tina did not participate in the search for him, and both showed very little interest in the case. Mike even had to be dragged out of bed when police told him Randi was missing. Tina's alibi for the night Randi went missing showed multiple inconsistencies. When the group returned from the casino at approximately 3:30 a.m., Randi was missing. An extensive search was done of the surrounding area, but it failed to turn up any clues. They would leave the area for Southern California 4 years after Randi was last seen with their daughter and son, who was born after Randi disappeared. The couple would later divorce in 1997. There have been no reported problems with their other 2 children. While they were not very cooperative in the investigation, they did not try to avoid authorities either. They both initially refused to take a polygraph exam, but later agreed and both failed the test when asked questions about the boys' whereabouts. There has been much speculation about the actual cause of Randi's disappearance, including theories that he was sold, killed accidentally or intentionally by Tina or Mike after the birthday party broke up, or maybe even abducted by a stranger, a family friend, or his biological mother. However, none of these theories have been substantiated. A Nevada grand jury was given evidence by investigators sometime after Randi disappeared, but indictments were not handed down due to the lack of evidence. Mike and Tina were given the chance to testify, but both refused. In a media interview in the spring of 2015, a detective investigating the case said he had gotten a hit on Randi's DNA in a database, and he believes Randi might be alive and living in the western United States. Alexis Maynard, Randi's biological mother, had legal custody of her son when he disappeared. Police originally thought she might have driven up from Southern California to take her son. However, investigators later determined she was not a suspect. She said more than a week went by before she even knew her son was missing. She said she found out about the disappearance when the FBI knocked on her door in San Diego. Apparently, Mike and Tina did not let her know that Randi was missing. She said the experience of her son disappearing changed her life. She said the process was so traumatic that she couldn't even raise her eldest daughter, so family had to take her in. She would later get her life back together and raise 2 daughters in Texas. It would be 20 years before the police followed up with her about Randi's disappearance. Mike Evers later died in 2014. Sadly, Randi has never been found, and if he is alive, he would be 32 years old, but as of today, this case remains unsolved.